The dust swirled around Daisy Lawson's boots as she stared at her swollen, broken hands, tears mixing with the dirt on her face. At 26, she never imagined she'd be fighting to save her father's farm alone, much less with two freshly broken hands that screamed in agony with every movement. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory showed no mercy to those who couldn't keep pace with its brutal demands. Daisy's small homestead sat on the outskirts of Vulture City, Arizona, a mining town that had sprung up around the gold discoveries nearly a decade prior. Her father had passed 6 months ago, leaving her the 20 acres of struggling farmland, a few head of cattle, and a mortgage that grew more impossible by the day. The cattle were thin, the crops withering under the relentless sun, and now her hands were useless after the accident with the plow horse. She cursed under her breath as she attempted to lift the water bucket with her forearms. The pain shot through her like lightning, causing her to drop the bucket. Water splashed onto the parched earth, disappearing almost instantly into the thirsty soil. "Not a drop to waste," she muttered, blinking back fresh tears of frustration. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up, squinting against the setting sun. Riders weren't common out this way, especially not with the drought turning most folks' attention to the mines rather than farming. The silhouette of a lone rider materialized through the dust, tall in the saddle and moving at a steady pace. Daisy straightened, wary but desperate enough not to hide. If it was Harold Blackman from the bank coming early for the payment, she'd rather face him standing than cowering behind her door. As the rider drew closer, she could make out more details. Not Blackman, this man was younger, leaner, with a broad-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. His horse, a magnificent chestnut quarter horse, showed signs of a long journey, its coat darkened with sweat and dust. The stranger pulled up 10 yards from where she stood and dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice deeper than she expected, with a slight Texas drawl. "Might I trouble you for some water for my horse?" Been riding hard since sunrise. Daisy stood her ground, acutely aware of her helplessness. "There's a trough by the barn," she replied, gesturing awkwardly with her elbows rather than her hands. "Help yourself." The man started to lead his horse toward the trough but stopped, noticing her strange movements. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, narrowed with concern. "You're hurt," he stated plainly, taking a step toward her. Daisy instinctively backed away. "It's nothing. Just a small accident." The stranger's gaze dropped to her hands, which were swollen to nearly twice their normal size, the skin mottled with ugly purple bruises. "That ain't nothing, madam. Those hands need tending." He took another careful step forward, as if approaching a spooked colt. "Name's Vincent Yancy. Most folks call me Vince. I've some skill with injuries if you'll allow me to help." "Mr. Yancy, I appreciate the offer, but I don't know you from Adam," Daisy replied, though her resolve was weakening. The pain had been near unbearable for 2 days now. Vincent removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. "Fair enough. I'm passing through to Prescott, was a field medic during the war. Before that, I worked cattle drives out of Texas. I'm no doctor, but I know broken bones when I see them." There was something in his straightforward manner that made Daisy hesitate. Her options were limited. Doc Simmons in town would charge more than she could afford, and the 10-mile ride would be excruciating. She'd been hoping to splint her hands herself, but had discovered quickly the impossibility of that task. "I can't pay you," she admitted, hating the vulnerability in her voice. Vincent's expression softened. "Not asking for payment, madam, just doing what any decent man would." The logic of her situation finally overcame her caution. Daisy Lawson, she introduced herself with a small nod, and I would be grateful for the help, Mr. Yancy. After watering his horse, Vincent followed Daisy into her modest cabin. The interior was neat but Spartan, bearing the marks of a place maintained by someone working too hard with too little. A small fire smoldered in the stone hearth, and a pot of what smelled like bean soup hung nearby. How did it happen? Vincent asked as he gently examined her hands in the better light of the cabin. Daisy winced at his touch, gentle as it was. Plow horse spooked yesterday morning. Got my hands caught in the reins as he bolted. Dragged me a fair piece before I got loose. Vincent's brow furrowed with concentration. Both hands, that's a hard piece of luck. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I need to set these bones before I wrap them. It'll hurt something fierce. Daisy swallowed hard but nodded. Do what you must. Vincent worked methodically, first gathering supplies, clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey he produced from his saddlebag, and thin pieces of wood he carefully split from a spare chair slat. He positioned her at the table, placing a folded towel beneath her hands. Take a good swig of this first, he advised, offering the whiskey bottle. Daisy hesitated only briefly before accepting. The liquor burned a fiery path down her throat, bringing water to her eyes. Vincent waited until she'd taken 2 substantial swallows before setting to work. The pain of having her bones realigned nearly caused her to faint. Vincent worked quickly but thoroughly, his large hands surprisingly deft as he manipulated her smaller ones, feeling for the broken bones and easing them back into alignment. Tears streamed freely down her face, but she bit her lip and refused to cry out. You're doing fine, he murmured encouragingly as he worked. Just a bit more now. By the time he finished wrapping both hands in neat splints secured with strips of clean cloth, Daisy was light-headed from the combination of pain and whiskey. Vincent helped her to sit more comfortably, then moved to stoke the fire and check the soup. When's the last time you ate, Miss Lawson? He asked, stirring the pot. Yesterday morning, she admitted. Haven't figured out how to manage cooking like this yet. Vincent nodded, understanding the predicament immediately. Well, let me earn my keep then. I'll see to your supper and tend to those animals outside. You rest a spell. Too exhausted to argue, Daisy watched as the stranger moved about her kitchen with unexpected competence, ladling soup into bowls and cutting bread that had gone slightly stale. He helped her eat, a humiliation she endured only because the alternative was starvation. After ensuring she'd eaten her fill, Vincent excused himself to care for the livestock. Through the open door, Daisy could hear him speaking softly to the animals, his voice a low, soothing rumble in the gathering dusk. When he returned, he carried a pail of fresh milk. Your cow was mighty uncomfortable, he explained, setting the pail on the table. Hope you don't mind me seeing to her. Thank you, Daisy said quietly. I've been worried about Bessie, couldn't figure how I'd manage milking. Vincent pulled up a chair opposite her. Miss Lawson, I don't mean to overstep, but you can't run this place alone with your hands like that. Those breaks need at least 6 weeks to heal proper. Daisy stiffened. I haven't much choice, Mr. Yancy. This farm is all I have. I understand that. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I'm proposing to stay on and help until you're mended. No strings attached. Suspicion flared in Daisy's eyes. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I know what it's like to be alone with no one to turn to, he replied simply. Lost my family in '67 to fever. Been drifting since. I've got time and 2 good hands to offer. I told you I can't pay. Room and board is payment enough, he interrupted. I've been sleeping under the stars for months. A roof and regular meals would be luxury. Daisy studied him, searching for deceit in his frank gaze and finding none. Still, she hesitated. Having a strange man on her property in her home went against everything she'd been raised to believe proper. As if sensing her thoughts, Vincent added, "I'll bunk in your barn, of course. And you can ask around town about me if it eases your mind. I passed through here 2 years back, worked some at the livery for a spell." The practicality of his offer was undeniable. Without help, she would lose the farm and possibly her hands if they didn't heal properly. Her closest neighbors were miles away, and most were struggling themselves in the drought. 1 week, she finally conceded. "We'll see how it goes for 1 week," Vincent nodded, accepting her terms without argument. "1 week it is, Miss Lawson." That night, true to his word, Vincent made his bed in the hayloft of the small barn. Daisy lay awake in her cabin, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person on her property, the creak of the barn door, the soft nicker of his horse responding to his voice, the faint whistle of a tune she didn't recognize. For the first time since her father's death, the crushing weight of solitude lifted slightly from her shoulders. Whether that was a comfort or a danger, she couldn't yet decide. Dawn broke harsh and bright across the Arizona landscape. Daisy awoke to the disorienting sensation of pain in her hands and the even more disorienting scent of coffee brewing. For a moment, she thought perhaps her father was still alive, that the past 6 months had been a terrible dream. Then reality crashed back as she tried to push herself up with her bandaged hands. Vincent had already been up for hours, she realized as she managed to dress herself awkwardly and emerge from her bedroom. The main room of the cabin was empty, but the coffee pot bubbled on the stove, and fresh biscuits sat on the table alongside a jar of preserved peaches she recognized from her own pantry. Outside, she could hear the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. Stepping onto the porch, she saw Vincent working steadily at the chopping block, his shirt already damp with sweat despite the early hour. A substantial pile of split logs stood testament to how long he'd been at it. He paused when he noticed her, setting the axe down and wiping his brow. "Morning, Miss Lawson. Hope I didn't wake you." "You didn't," she assured him, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance. "You've been busy." Vincent nodded toward the woodpile. "Noticed your supply was running low, figured I'd get ahead of it before the real heat sets in." He gestured to the fields beyond the house. "Your south field looks like it could use irrigation. The creek's low but still running. I could divert some water if you're agreeable." Daisy blinked, surprised by his initiative and assessment. "Yes, that would help. The corn's struggling." "I'll see to it after breakfast." Vincent gathered an armload of wood. "Speaking of which, there's coffee and biscuits inside. Let me just stack this and I'll help you with your meal." The awkwardness of being fed like a child hadn't diminished overnight, but hunger overcame pride. Vincent was matter-of-fact about the assistance, treating it as he might any other chore, which somehow made it easier to accept. "How are the hands feeling this morning?" he asked as he poured her coffee. "Throbbing," Daisy admitted, "but not as sharp as yesterday." Vincent nodded. "That's good. I'll check the splints later, make sure nothing's shifted." He hesitated, then added, "I took the liberty of checking your stores. You're running low on several essentials. I thought I might ride into town later, pick up what you need." The offer highlighted another problem. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm short on cash until I can get a crop to market." Vincent's expression remained neutral. "I've got some money put by. Consider it an advance on my keep." "Mr. Yancy, Miss Lawson," he countered, "I understand pride. Believe me. But sometimes accepting help is the smartest thing a person can do." Their eyes met across the table, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Daisy nodded. "Thank you, but I'll repay every cent once I'm able." "I don't doubt it for a minute," Vincent replied with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his weathered face, softening the lines around his eyes and revealing a warmth she hadn't expected. Over the next few days, a rhythm developed between them. Vincent rose before dawn to handle the most demanding chores, milking the cow, feeding the livestock, and working on the irrigation channels he was digging to the struggling fields. By the time Daisy emerged, breakfast would be waiting, and Vincent would briefly outline his plans for the day. Daisy found herself increasingly frustrated by her own helplessness, but Vincent never seemed to mind her limitations. He showed remarkable patience in assisting her with tasks she couldn't manage alone, from eating to washing her face. When she apologized for the burden, he waved away her concerns. "My mother lost both arms in a cotton gin accident when I was 10, he explained as he helped her wash her hair on the 4th day. 7 of us kids and Pa working dawn to dusk. We all learned to help Mama with the things she couldn't do herself. This ain't so different." The casual revelation stunned Daisy. "I'm sorry about your mother. Was she able to adapt?" Vincent's hands were gentle as they worked soap through her long brown hair. "She was the strongest woman I ever knew. By the time I was 12, she could do almost everything with her feet and mouth that most folks do with hands. Taught herself to write holding a pen with her toes. The image was both shocking and inspiring. And you said you lost her to fever." A shadow passed over Vincent's face. "Cholera swept through our county in '67. Took Ma, Pa, and 3 of my siblings in a week. The rest of us scattered after that." Daisy's heart ached for the young man he must have been, facing such devastating loss. "My mother died birthing me," she offered in return. "It was just Pa and me until last winter. Pneumonia took him." Vincent nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Seems we've both had our share of hard roads." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in vibrant oranges and purples, Daisy found herself studying Vincent's profile. In just 4 days, he had transformed her struggling farm. The irrigation channels were bringing new life to the cornfield. The animals looked healthier, and the cabin had never been so well stocked or organized. More than that, the crushing loneliness that had been her constant companion since her father's death had retreated. Vincent was not a talkative man, but his presence was steady and reassuring. When he did speak, his words were thoughtful and often laced with a dry humor she was coming to appreciate. "You're good at this," she remarked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Farming, I mean." Vincent turned to look at her, the fading light catching the blue of his eyes. "Grew up on a farm. It gets in your blood." He stretched his long legs out before him. "Truth be told, I've missed it. Drifting's a hollow way to live after a while. Why did you leave Texas?" she asked, realizing she knew little about his life between the loss of his family and his arrival at her farm. Vincent was quiet for so long that Daisy thought he might not answer. "Finally," he said, "after the war and losing my family, there wasn't much left for me there. Too many ghosts." He paused. "I rode with a cattle outfit for a spell, then tried my hand at mining, even worked as a deputy in New Mexico for a year." "A deputy?" Daisy couldn't hide her surprise. A rueful smile crossed his face. "Wasn't suited for it. Too much politics, not enough justice." He looked out at the darkening landscape. "I keep thinking I'll find somewhere that feels like home again. Haven't yet." The vulnerability in his admission touched something in Daisy. This man who appeared so capable, so self-sufficient, was as adrift as she had felt these past months. "1 week's almost up," she said quietly. Vincent nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "It is." "I'd be grateful if you'd consider staying longer," Daisy offered, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "The farm needs more work than I can manage alone, even when my hands heal." The smile that spread across Vincent's face was slow but genuine. "I'd like that, Miss Lawson." I'd like that very much. As promised, Vincent continued to sleep in the barn, maintaining a respectful distance that Daisy appreciated, even as she found herself increasingly drawn to his company. Their conversations gradually lengthened, extending into the evenings as they sat by the fire or on the porch, sharing stories of their pasts and tentative hopes for their futures. On the 10th day of Vincent's stay, Daisy insisted on accompanying him to town for supplies. Her hands were still splinted, but the pain had subsided to a dull ache, and the walls of the cabin were beginning to close in on her after so many days of restricted activity. Vulture City was bustling with the usual Saturday traffic miners spending their weekly pay, ranchers in for supplies, and families attending to errands. Vincent helped Daisy from the wagon with careful hands, then offered his arm for support as they navigated the uneven boardwalk. "Miss Lawson, what in heaven's name happened to you?" The concerned voice belonged to Martha Simmons, the doctor's wife, who hurried toward them from the mercantile. "Had an accident with my plow horse," Daisy explained, acutely aware of the curious glances now directed their way. "Mr. Yancy here was kind enough to tend to my hands and help out at the farm." Martha's eyes darted between Daisy and Vincent, barely disguised concern in her expression. "How fortunate Mr. Yancy was passing by." Vincent tipped his hat politely. "Madam." "You remember Vincent, surely," Daisy added. "He worked at Jensen's livery a couple years back." Recognition dawned on Martha's face. "Oh, yes, of course. The Texas gentleman." Her expression relaxed somewhat. "My husband spoke highly of your medical knowledge, Mr. Yancy. Said you assisted him with that mining accident." Vincent nodded modestly. "Doc Simmons is too generous. I just did what I could." The exchange seemed to ease Martha's concerns about the propriety of the situation, though Daisy knew the gossip would spread through town regardless. A single woman living alone with an unmarried man, regardless of the circumstances, was bound to raise eyebrows. As they continued down the street toward the general store, Daisy noticed the change in Vincent's demeanor. In town, he was more alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, his posture slightly more rigid. The easy comfort that characterized their interactions at the farm had been replaced by a watchful wariness. "Is something wrong?" she asked quietly as they entered the mercantile. Vincent's expression softened as he looked down at her. Old habits, never did care much for towns. He guided her to the counter. "Let's get what we need and head back." Mr. Hoffman, the storekeeper, greeted them with professional courtesy, though his eyes lingered curiously on Daisy's bandaged hands and Vincent's protective presence beside her. "Miss Lawson, good to see you. Been wondering how you've been managing out there alone." He began to assemble their list of supplies. "Your pa was a good man, still missed around here." "Thank you, Mr. Hoffman," Daisy replied, the mention of her father bringing a familiar pang of grief. "We're making do." "Heard Blackman from the bank's been sniffing around your property," Hoffman remarked as he measured out flour. "Man's been buying up every struggling homestead he can get his hands on." Vincent's attention sharpened. "Blackman, Harold Blackman," Daisy explained in a low voice. "He holds the note on my farm. Been pressuring me to sell since Pa died." Hoffman nodded sagely. "Rumor is he's working with the mining company. They think there might be gold on some of that foothill property." The news wasn't entirely surprising. Daisy had suspected Blackman's interest wasn't merely financial, but the confirmation made her stomach knot with worry. If the banker wanted her land badly enough, he might find ways to force her hand beyond simply waiting for her to miss a payment. Vincent seemed to read her thoughts. "When's your next payment due?" he asked quietly as they moved to examine canned goods. 2 weeks, Daisy admitted. I've been setting aside what I can, but with the drought. Vincent nodded thoughtfully but said nothing more on the subject. Their shopping completed, they were loading supplies into the wagon when a well-dressed man approached, his expensive boots gleaming with fresh polish, his suit out of place among the town's more practical attire. "Miss Lawson," he called, his voice overly cordial. "What a pleasant surprise." Daisy's spine stiffened at the sound. "Mr. Blackman." Harold Blackman removed his hat, revealing thinning hair carefully arranged to hide the fact. His smile didn't reach his cold eyes as they assessed first her bandaged hands, then Vincent's presence. "I see you've had some misfortune," he remarked, gesturing to her hands. "And acquired assistance." "Vincent Yancy," Vincent introduced himself, not offering his hand but stepping slightly forward, positioning himself between Daisy and the banker. Blackman's smile tightened. "A hired hand, Miss Lawson. I wasn't aware your operation could support employees." "Mr. Yancy is a friend helping during my recovery," Daisy replied evenly. "The farm is doing just fine. Thank you for your concern." Of course. Blackman's tone was dismissive. "Though I must remind you that your quarterly payment is approaching. I do hope these setbacks won't interfere with your ability to meet your obligations." Vincent's voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of steel. "Miss Lawson is well aware of her obligations, Mr. Blackman. We should be on our way now, daylight's burning." Blackman's eyes narrowed at the interruption, but he maintained his facade of civility. "Indeed. Good day, Miss Lawson. Do remember my standing offer to purchase your property should you reconsider your position." As they drove out of town, Daisy's hands trembled within their splints, though whether from anger or anxiety, she couldn't tell. "That man," she muttered, unable to fully articulate her feelings. Vincent handled the reins with casual expertise. Men like Blackman are the same everywhere. They see land as numbers in a ledger, not as something living. "It's more than that," Daisy said, staring at the horizon. "He acts like he's already won, like my farm is already his. Sometimes I worry he's right." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "How short are you on the payment?" Daisy hesitated, then decided honesty was needed. "About half. The drought hit us hard this year, and Pa's medical bills took most of our savings before he passed." Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "I might have an idea. There's good money in breaking horses, and I notice the Rocking J spread is bringing in some new stock. The foreman there, Jenkins, knows me from my time at the livery. He might be willing to hire me for a few days' work." "Vincent, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," he interrupted gently. "I'm offering. Besides, it won't take me away from your farm for long. Just a few days, and we'd have enough to make that payment with some to spare." The fact that he referred to it as your farm rather than the farm wasn't lost on Daisy. Nor was the way he said "we" instead of "you" when discussing the payment. Somewhere in the past 10 days, her problems had become their problems, a shift she found both comforting and frightening. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to adequately express what his support meant to her. Vincent's smile was warm as he glanced her way. "That's what friends do, Daisy." It was the first time he'd called her by her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. The next morning, Vincent rode out to the Rocking J ranch to speak with Jenkins about work. He returned by midday, a satisfied expression on his face. "Starting tomorrow," he announced as he unsaddled his horse. "They've got 15 Mustangs fresh off the range that need gentling. Jenkins is offering $4 a head for the ones. I can get saddle ready within the week." Daisy did the calculation quickly. "That's $60 if you break them all." Vincent nodded. "More than enough to cover what you need for the bank, with some left for seed come spring." But can you really break 15 horses in a week? Daisy asked, concerned about both the ambitious goal and the danger it presented. A confident smile crossed Vincent's face. I've been breaking horses since I was 14. Got away with them that most don't. His expression softened. Don't worry about me, Daisy. I know what I'm doing. For the next 5 days, Vincent rode out before dawn and returned after sunset, his body bearing fresh bruises and his clothes dusty from repeated falls, but his spirit undiminished. Each evening, he would eat the dinner Daisy had managed to prepare one-handed, then collapse into exhausted sleep in the barn loft. Daisy found herself watching the horizon for his return each day with increasing anticipation. The farm seemed emptier without his presence, the silence more pronounced. She kept herself busy as best she could, determined to regain some independence despite her injured hands. On the 6th day, Vincent returned earlier than usual, his face split with a triumphant grin. 15 for 15, he announced as he dismounted. And Jenkins was so pleased he threw in a $5 bonus. Daisy couldn't contain her delight. Vincent, that's wonderful. Without thinking, she stepped forward and embraced him, only realizing the impropriety when she felt his body stiffen momentarily in surprise. Before she could pull away, however, his arms came around her gently, returning the embrace with careful pressure that avoided her injured hands. Sorry, she murmured, stepping back, her face flushed. I was just so relieved. Vincent's eyes were warm as they met hers. No need to apologize, Daisy. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, a comfortable silence between them, Daisy gathered her courage. Vincent, she began, her heart beating faster. I've been thinking. The farm needs more than just temporary help. Even when my hands heal, managing alone is. It's not just difficult, it's nearly impossible. Vincent turned to look at her, his expression carefully neutral. What are you suggesting? Daisy took a deep breath. A partnership of sorts. You're skilled with the land and the animals, and you've already proven you can bring in additional income with your horse-breaking abilities. She hurried on before she lost her nerve. You said yourself that drifting is a hollow way to live. Maybe you could find what you're looking for here. The silence that followed her proposal seemed to stretch endlessly. Vincent's face was difficult to read in the dim light, but she could sense him weighing her words carefully. A business arrangement. He finally asked, his voice unusually guarded. Daisy hesitated. To start, yes. I can offer a quarter share of the farm's profits in exchange for your labor and expertise. Vincent nodded slowly, his eyes still on her face. And is that all you're offering, Daisy? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Daisy felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze. I don't know, she admitted honestly. I know it's improper to even suggest such an arrangement, but these past weeks have been different than I expected. You've been different than I expected. Vincent's expression softened. You've surprised me too. He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so she could withdraw if she wished, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple touch sent a shiver down Daisy's spine. I accept your business proposal, he said quietly. As for the rest, perhaps we should give it time. Get to know each other proper-like without the pressure of your injuries or the bank payment hanging over us. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Daisy's chest. That's sensible, she agreed. Vincent's smile held a hint of mischief. Never been accused of being sensible before. Must be your influence. The following day they rode together into Vulture City to make the payment to the bank. Harold Blackman made no effort to hide his displeasure when Daisy counted out the full amount. His thin lips pressed into a tight line as he wrote out the receipt. Quite the recovery, Miss Lawson, he remarked coldly. "One might wonder at the sudden change in your fortunes." "Good management and hard work, Mr. Blackman," Daisy replied evenly. "Nothing more mysterious than that." As they left the bank, Vincent offered Daisy his arm, a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. The eyes of the town followed them as they made their purchases and loaded their wagon, the speculation evident in every glance. "They're talking about us," Daisy murmured as Vincent helped her into the wagon seat. "Let them talk," he replied simply. Nothing wrong with two people working together to build something. On the ride home, Vincent was unusually quiet, his brow furrowed in thought. When they crested the hill that overlooked the Lawson farm, he pulled the wagon to a halt, gazing down at the modest homestead below. "Something on your mind?" Daisy asked. Vincent turned to her, his expression serious. "Been thinking about our arrangement. If I'm going to be a proper partner in this venture, I should invest more than just my labor." Daisy frowned. "I don't understand." "I've got savings," he explained. "Not a fortune, but enough to make some improvements to the place. Better irrigation, maybe some better breeding stock for the cattle. With the right investments now, we could double production by next year." The offer stunned Daisy. "Vincent, that's your money, your future." A small smile touched his lips. "That's what I'm saying, Daisy. I want my future to be here." He paused, then added more softly, "with you if you'll have me." Daisy's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I'd like to court you proper," Vincent clarified. "While we build this farm together, see if what's growing between us is as strong as I think it might be." Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes. "I'd like that very much, Vincent." His smile broadened, lighting his entire face. "Good, that's real good." Over the next 4 weeks, as summer gave way to early autumn, Vincent's promised improvements to the farm began to take shape. The irrigation system he designed brought new life to fields that had struggled for years, and the small herd of cattle grew with the addition of a prime bull he purchased from a breeder near Prescott. Daisy's hands healed steadily under Vincent's careful attention. When the time came to remove the splints, he worked with her patiently as she relearned how to use her fingers, which were stiff and weaker than before. Every small victory, the first time she successfully buttoned her own dress, the day she managed to braid her hair unaided, was celebrated between them. Their courtship progressed with the same steady care. Vincent was unfailingly respectful, continuing to sleep in the barn despite Daisy's growing wish for him to be closer. His touches were restrained but increasingly frequent, a hand at the small of her back as they walked, fingers brushing as they worked side by side, a gentle caress of her cheek when they said good night. Each Sunday, they attended church together in Vulture City, enduring the curious glances and whispered comments with dignified silence. After services, Vincent would escort Daisy to dinner at the small hotel dining room, treating the occasion with formal propriety that slowly began to win over even the most skeptical townspeople. It was after one such Sunday dinner, as they walked arm in arm along the main street before heading home, that they encountered Harold Blackman emerging from the land office. The banker's face darkened at the sight of them. "Miss Lawson, Mr. Yancy." He greeted them with cold civility. "I understand congratulations may soon be in order." Daisy exchanged a confused glance with Vincent. "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Blackman." "Only that your arrangement seems to be progressing toward permanence," Blackman replied with a thin smile. "How fortunate for you both." Vincent's arm tightened slightly around Daisy's. "Miss Lawson and I appreciate your good wishes," he responded evenly. Blackman's smile never reached his eyes. "Of course. Though I feel compelled to mention that should your circumstances change, Miss Lawson, my offer to purchase your property remains open." The mining company has expressed increased interest in that area recently. The farm is not for sale, Mr. Blackman, Daisy stated firmly. Not now, not ever. Everything has its price, Miss Lawson, Blackman replied softly. Everything and everyone. His gaze shifted meaningfully to Vincent before he tipped his hat and continued on his way. The encounter left Daisy unsettled, but Vincent seemed more thoughtful than concerned as they rode home. He's a desperate man, Vincent finally said as they approached the farm, the kind who's used to getting his way. Daisy shook her head. What did he mean about everything having its price? And why did he look at you that way? Vincent's expression was guarded. Some men think everyone can be bought or intimidated. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. Don't worry about Blackman. He's just trying to rattle us. Despite his reassurances, Vincent increased his vigilance in the days that followed. He began carrying his revolver openly when working the far fields, and he insisted on checking the perimeter of the property each evening before retiring to the barn. Daisy watched these precautions with growing concern. Do you really think Blackman would try something underhanded? Vincent considered the question seriously. I've seen men like him before. When money and the law don't get them what they want, some turn to other methods. The warning proved prescient 3 nights later when Vincent awoke to the smell of smoke. He bolted from his bedroll in the barn loft to discover flames licking up the side of the hay storage attached to the main barn structure. Moving with decisive speed, Vincent raised the alarm, pounding on the cabin door to wake Daisy before rushing to free the animals from the barn. Together, they formed a bucket brigade from the well to the fire, working desperately to contain the blaze before it consumed the entire barn and threatened the nearby cabin. Dawn was breaking by the time they extinguished the last of the flames. Exhausted and smoke-stained, they surveyed the damage. The hay storage was destroyed, and one wall of the barn was charred but standing. Most importantly, all the animals had been saved. It was deliberate, Vincent stated grimly, holding up the remains of a kerosene-soaked rag he'd found near the point of origin. Someone set this fire intentionally. Daisy's face was pale beneath the soot. Blackman can't prove it, Vincent replied. But the timing's too convenient to be coincidence. Sheriff Matthews from Vulture City rode out later that morning in response to Vincent's report of the fire. The lawman examined the evidence with practiced eyes but shook his head doubtfully. Not much I can do without witnesses, folks. Could have been a drifter or even a carelessly tossed cigar. He eyed Vincent speculatively. Heard you two have been making improvements, making some folks in town nervous about their own ambitions for this land. We're not selling, Daisy stated firmly, standing shoulder to shoulder with Vincent. No matter what pressure is applied, Sheriff Matthews nodded slowly. Admire your grit, Miss Lawson, just be careful. I'll keep an eye out, but I can't post a deputy out here. After the sheriff departed, Vincent turned to Daisy, his expression grave. You should go stay in town for a while, maybe with the Reverend's family, just until I can be sure it's safe here. Daisy's chin lifted stubbornly. This is my home, Vincent, our home. I won't be driven from it by fear. Daisy, no, she interrupted firmly. We face this together. That was our agreement, wasn't it? Partners. Vincent's concern was evident, but so was his pride in her determination. Partners, he agreed reluctantly. But we take precautions. No working the fields alone, and we both go armed. The fire marked a turning point in their relationship. That night, after securing the property as best they could, Vincent insisted on sleeping in the cabin on the floor by the door, revolver at his side. Daisy didn't object, the fear of what might have happened had the fire reached the cabin still fresh in her mind. In the soft glow of the banked fire, Daisy watched Vincent from her bedroom doorway. He had removed his boots but remained fully clothed, his tall frame stretched out on a bedroll, one arm folded behind his head as he stared at the ceiling. "Vincent," she called softly. He turned his head, instantly alert. "Everything all right?" Daisy stepped into the main room, her nightdress and wrapper modest but still more intimate attire than he'd seen her in before. "I can't sleep." Vincent sat up, concern in his eyes. Understandable after tonight. She moved closer, then carefully knelt beside his bedroll. "It's not just the fire. I've been thinking about us, about this partnership we're building." Vincent's expression softened. "What about it?" "Life is uncertain," Daisy said quietly. "My father thought he had years ahead of him. Your family never expected to be taken by fever." She reached out, placing her hand over his. "I don't want to waste the time we have being overly cautious or proper." Vincent's eyes never left hers as he slowly turned his hand to clasp hers. "What are you saying, Daisy?" Her heart pounding, Daisy took a deep breath. "I'm saying I love you, Vincent Yancy. I love your strength and your kindness. I love how you see this land the way I do, as something worth fighting for." She squeezed his hand. "And I don't want to wait any longer to start our life together. Properly together." Vincent's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "Are you asking me to marry you, Daisy Lawson?" A smile bloomed on her face. "I suppose I am." Vincent leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "I love you too," he murmured. "Have since about the third day, I reckon, when you cursed a blue streak after dropping that plate and then apologized to me for the language." Daisy laughed softly at the memory. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering with words, Vincent closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was gentle but filled with promise. Daisy's arms wound around his neck as she returned the kiss with all the emotion that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally parted, both breathless, Vincent smiled. "That's a definite yes." They were married the following Sunday in the small church in Vulture City, with Reverend Collins officiating and half the town in attendance, drawn as much by curiosity as by genuine goodwill. Daisy wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Martha Simmons, who had become an unexpected ally after witnessing the couple's devotion to each other. Harold Blackman was conspicuously absent from the celebration, though rumors circulated that he had been seen boarding the stage to Prescott that morning, a development that Vincent noted with cautious optimism. The newlyweds returned to their farm that evening to find a surprise waiting. The neighboring ranchers, led by Jenkins from the Rocking J, had gathered to raise a new hay barn in their absence. The structure stood complete, stocked with fresh hay and adorned with a hand-painted sign that read, "Yancy Farm." "Welcome home, Mrs. Yancy," Vincent murmured as he lifted Daisy from their wagon and carried her across the threshold of the cabin that was now truly theirs together. That night, as moonlight filtered through the cabin windows, they came together as husband and wife, their passion tempered with tenderness as Vincent was mindful of Daisy's still healing hands. In the aftermath, lying tangled in each other's arms, they spoke in hushed voices of their plans for the future, the crops they would plant, the herd they would build, the family they hoped to create. "Did you ever imagine when you first rode up to my farm that we'd end up here?" Daisy asked, her head resting on Vincent's chest. Vincent's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Can't say I did. Was just looking for water for my horse." His arms tightened around her. "Found a whole lot more than I bargained for." Daisy smiled against his skin. "Found a woman with broken hands and a broken farm." "Found a woman with more courage than anyone I've ever known," Vincent corrected, "and a piece of land worth fighting for." 3 days after the wedding, a letter arrived from the bank in Prescott. Harold Blackman had resigned his position. The letter explained, and the new manager wished to inform them that their loan had been reclassified as good standing, with more favorable terms available should they wish to discuss expansion. Expansion, Vincent repeated thoughtfully as they sat at their kitchen table, the letter between them. They might be onto something there. Daisy raised an eyebrow. Oh, been thinking we could diversify. Add some sheep, maybe plant an orchard on that north slope. His eyes met hers, warm with emotion. Build something that could support a growing family. Daisy's heart swelled at the implication. I'd like that very much. Winter came to the Arizona territory with unexpected fury that year. December brought freezing temperatures and heavy snow that blanketed the desert in white. Inside the snug cabin, Vincent and Daisy weathered the storms in comfort, the larder well stocked and the woodpile high thanks to their preparations. On Christmas morning, Vincent presented Daisy with a rocking chair he had been secretly crafting in the barn during the evening hours. The wood was polished to a high shine, the joints fitted with precision, and the seat cushioned with stuffing from their harvest. For when the baby comes, he explained softly, placing his hand gently over her still flat stomach. Daisy's eyes widened in surprise. How did you know? I was going to tell you today. Vincent smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. You've been turning a little green at the smell of coffee for a week now. My mother was the same way with all of us. Tears of joy filled Daisy's eyes as she pulled him down for a kiss. Happy Christmas, Vincent. Happy Christmas, my love, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. The first of many. Spring arrived with gentle rains that transformed the landscape into a riot of wildflowers and fresh growth. The farm flourished under their combined care, the fields lush with crops, the cattle healthy and increasing, the new orchard taking root on the north slope. Daisy's pregnancy progressed steadily, her body softening and rounding with new life. Vincent was attentive to her every need, taking on more of the physical labor as her condition advanced, insisting she rest during the heat of the day. In late August, as the summer heat began to wane, their son was born after a difficult but ultimately successful labor attended by both Martha Simmons and her husband, the doctor. They named him Thomas, after Daisy's father, with James as his middle name to honor Vincent's. He has your eyes, Daisy murmured as they gazed down at their newborn son, his tiny hand wrapped around Vincent's finger. And your determination, Vincent replied with a smile as the baby's grip tightened. Going to be a strong one, this boy. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The farm expanded as Vincent had envisioned, with sheep added to their livestock, and the orchard beginning to bear fruit by the time Thomas was walking. When Daisy discovered she was expecting their second child, they hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work, ensuring the farm's operations continued smoothly. Their daughter, Elizabeth, arrived in the spring of Thomas's third year, a fair-haired child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's quiet strength. The family of four settled into a rhythm of work and love that transformed the once struggling homestead into one of the most prosperous in the area. News reached them occasionally of Harold Blackman. He had moved to California, they heard, where his schemes had eventually landed him in legal trouble. Vincent and Daisy received the information with neither pleasure nor regret. The banker had become a distant figure in their past, his threats long neutralized by their success, and the community that had formed around them. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Vincent took Daisy to the highest point of their property, where they could see the full expanse of what they had built together. The fields were golden with ripening wheat, the orchards heavy with fruit, the pastures dotted with healthy livestock. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house, with a wide porch where their children played under the watchful eyes of Martha Simmons, who had become like a grandmother to them. "Look at what we've created," Vincent said softly, his arm around Daisy's waist. "All from a chance meeting and a pair of broken hands." Daisy leaned into his embrace, her hands long healed but bearing the slight imperfections of bones that had mended strong but not perfect, reaching up to touch his face. "Best accident I ever had." Vincent laughed, the sound carrying across the land they both loved. "Can't argue with that." He turned to face her fully, his expression growing serious. "Are you happy, Daisy? Truly happy?" Daisy's smile was radiant as she stood on tiptoe to kiss him. "More than I ever thought possible. This land, our children. It's everything I could want and more than I ever dreamed." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple reminiscent of that first evening Vincent had spent on her porch, they walked hand in hand back toward their home. Their children's laughter carried on the evening breeze, a promise of the future they continued to build together. "You know," Vincent remarked as they approached the house, "I spent years drifting, looking for something I couldn't name. Never imagined I'd find it because a plow horse spooked and a stubborn woman needed her hands bandaged." Daisy squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Sometimes the best journeys end exactly where they're supposed to, even if it's not where we thought we were headed." "Especially then," Vincent agreed, returning the pressure of her fingers. "Especially then."